What is up, guys, and welcome to today's video. So we are going to be doing a tier list for the upcoming meta format. So tomorrow the ban list officially takes place that destroys Cash Tira. Overall, it shouldn't do a lot to the metagame, but it is going to shift things around. The meta has been warped around Cash Tira, Arise Heart, and its banishing effects, and weirdly enough, the format is now being warped around a different deck entirely, that of course being Unchained. So how the format shapes up, what hand traps are going to be played, are all going to play a role in how well different decks do. Now, this is by no means a comprehensive list. This is just a list of the decks that I came up with and thought, well, I've played against these in the last few weeks. These are probably what people are going to be playing when Arise Heart actually falls tomorrow. So we have, in our tiers, we have Tier 1, obviously the best decks in the room. Nothing so dominant that it's completely destroying everything else, but still decks that you can guarantee you're going to run into one or two players at your locals. Tier 1.5 are decks that compete with Tier 1, however, don't quite have the power to break through. Tier 2 are decks that are obviously a little bit weaker, but however still see success. Rogue decks, of course, see success from time to time, but are either not played enough or underexplored. And then format dependent are going to be decks that by no means are bad, however, I think it completely depends on how the format changes after the Arise Heart ban. Whether we're going to see more Droll, less Droll, things like Shifter being played in the main deck, all things that play a big role. So let's go ahead and get on into it. So first up we have Branded, and honestly I think Branded plays a little bit too low to the ground with just such a good resource loop. They don't have a lot of ways to play around the best decks. They're still just doing Gimmick Puppet Lock, and it's not doing that great. So I think we're just going to put Branded, pure Branded, in tier 2. However, Chimera Branded does a lot more. Not only does it not lose to Ash Blossom on the Branded Fusion, it also has a lot more staying power and just as strong of a resource loop. I'm comfortable putting Chimera Branded in tier 1.5. Dark World is a deck that I've seen being played from time to time. You can do so much. You can hand rip your opponent for 4 depending on obviously your hand, but overall I think it completely depends on how the format shapes up. If we keep seeing Droll and Shifter in main decks, this will not do very well. Dragon Link is one of the other few victim decks of this ban list, not only losing one Magma but one Chaos Space. One Magma doesn't matter too much, the deck does the exact same thing, it just doesn't have that much crackback on the turn 3 and 4. However, losing Chaos Space does essentially mean that this deck doesn't have the recursion that it used to have. It still does have recursion with Branded Regain, however it doesn't have the on-demand recursion and the draw power of Chaos Space, so you really have to make the Chaos Space work for you. That being said, I still will put it in 1.5, probably at the top of 1.5 to be honest. Up next we have Drytron. I'll be 100% honest, Drytron, the only reason people are exploring it is because it went from 2 Herald of Orange Light to 3. It was doing nothing with 2, it will do nothing with 3. Really what this deck needs is something like the Ishizu cards to come back or Eva to come back to really see meta contention. Other than that, I don't see this making much of an impact on the format. Something similar is with Exo Sisters. It sees a lot of play when Shifter sees play. When Shifter sees play, this sees play, because obviously it does a lot of good work when Shifter is active. That being said, now that the main Shifter, aka the Macrocosmos, aka the Arise Heart, is no longer going to be around, I can't say that Exo Sister will be doing anything more than Drytron. It will see some play here and there, but I don't think it's going to be doing a lot. Up next we have a Cyber's Pile deck. Now, a lot of my friends are very big into the Cyber's Pile decks. I enjoy them quite a lot myself. I think they're very cool, I think they have a lot of potential, but they have one big problem. Actually, several. They lose to Droll, they lose to Shifter. So just like all these other decks, this is pretty format dependent. If we see Droll seeing a lot less play, if we see Shifter seeing a lot less play, this will make a rise to full height and it will do a lot of damage. Up next we have Fluandries. Now, Fluanderies, a lot of people have kind of written off, but the truth is it actually has a very strong play against one of the better decks in the room, that being, of course, Unchained. By the way, Unchained, we're just going to go ahead and throw that right into Tier 1. There's no reason to slow roll it, there's no reason to slow play it. Unchained is one of the best decks in the room, and because of that, a lot of the decks are warping around Unchained. People are playing decks just to beat Unchained. And Fluanderies is one of the decks that does just that. It beats Unchained, and it beats it quite easily. Because obviously if you make Empen, they can no longer use their Yama effect, they can't use their Soul of Rage effect. The only way they have to really deal with an Empen is their trap cards. The DDD King Machinex, or the Vice King Requiem into Machinex, use the Machinex pop cards, use stuff like that. And then otherwise, they don't really have a lot of ways to out the Empen. So just the fact that Empen shuts off all the links pretty much does Unchained in. Up next we have Heroes. Heroes, I think, are always in a very weird position where they do a lot but they don't do enough. Like, they lose to Droll, they can sometimes lose to Shifter, obviously they lose to Nibiru, which we'll probably see a good bit of play here very shortly, but they just have such strong options in Dark Angel, Plasma. The new cards that we got in Maze of Memories are very strong. I'm comfortable putting Heroes above pure branded, not necessarily in power, but just pure options. Infernoble. Infernoble is another deck that I'm just going to go ahead and quickly drop into format dependent. I think it does a lot if it doesn't get Drolled, it does a lot if it doesn't get Shiftered, but overall we have to see how the format shapes up. Labyrinth is a very interesting deck. Labyrinth is a deck that has not really seen as much play as I would have thought. If you asked me 6 months ago what is the best deck in the game, it's Labyrinth. However, it just didn't see the experimentation because it is a very hard deck to play. However, Labyrinth has fallen off significantly. I think one of the reasons is because Unchained does a lot against Labyrinth, just considering its Fiends. The fact that you can Soul of Rage into a Yama to get extension, and then you can do just really crazy stuff. I'm still going to put Labyrinth in Tier 1.5. I don't necessarily know if it's better than Chimera branded, but I'm comfortable putting it there. Next we have Mannadium. Mannadium was seeing a lot of play. It has a lot of potential, has a lot of strong synchro plays. I'm not necessarily sure if it's... this is one that I'm kind of curious to put. I definitely want to put it above Heroes, and especially if they get more support, when they get more support, I should say. I think I'd put it between Labyrinth and Chimera branded right now. Up next we have Purely. We'll just go ahead and drop that into Tier 1. It's one of the few decks that competes with Unchained. There's a lot of things that exist for Purely that make it pretty good. Obviously, going on the play, Purely, if they are able to make the Noir before Unchained can really get into their plays, they are functionally an FTK. For those of you who are curious, I actually thought this as well. The X Purely Noir, when it has enough materials to become unaffected by activated effects, the Unchained Soul of Rage cannot link with this. This was ruled incorrectly at a YCS, and it's been clarified that the Unchained Soul of Rage does have to target the monster as an effect. That is part of the effect. The Purely monster is unaffected by that part of the effect. Therefore, the targeting does not stick. Therefore, the Unchained Soul of Rage doesn't know what it's linking with. That's a short, kind of mile-high explanation, but that is why X Purely Noir cannot be linked with Unchained, the Unchained Link monsters. So overall, it does have a very strong game plan. The only problem is it has a very telegraphed game plan. There's not a lot you can do. There are like OTKs you can do with the Purely cards, but everything's very telegraphed. So if Purely starts seeing a lot of play, there's just a lot of very easy counterplay. Rescue Ace is one of those frustrating decks that I don't necessarily like. I think it does a very weird set of gameplay. It's so reliant on seeing just one card. I don't like decks that do that, but I think just the power of, set 4 back row, unless you get Even Lead, unless you get, Lightning Storm, Feather Duster, something like that, you're really doing pretty well with Rescue Ace. So I don't think I think it's a Tier 1 deck. I think it's the bottom of the Tier 1 decks, however. I don't think it's really that good. Sun Avalon. Sun Avalon has I think after Fluanderies, it has the easiest time beating Unchained. So Avalon Rika has a very strong game plan. There's so many things that it does that almost nothing else does, and it's very, very difficult to play around Rickus and Avalon. Overall, it's just a really strong deck that interacts on a completely different axis than any of the tier 1 decks. Sprite. So here's the weird thing. So this is all Sprite variants. If we're including all Sprite variants like the Live Twin Runic Sprite variants, all the pro players, Jesse Cotton, Joshua Schmidt, everyone is saying that Live Twin Runic Sprite is a real deck. I haven't seen it. I don't really think it is. I'm not saying it's a bad deck, but it just is kind of like it remains to be seen for me. It's not seeing the level of play and experimentation that the other decks are seeing, as far as I can tell. Sword Soul. It's rogue. I'm sorry. It does what it does. It does it well. But it's been doing the same thing for forever. Even when they got Danglong, nothing changed. So I don't think the deck can really be classified as a tier 1 deck or even a tier 2 deck. I think it's so telegraphed, even though it has a very strong resource loop, even though it has a very good play style, it just still loses to the same things it always lost to. D-Barrier, it loses to removing the bodies, just sticking them with a token. So yeah. Similarly, we have the kind of synchro pile decks. They do a lot of cool things. If you've ever watched, like, it's a YouTube combo deck. That's what it is. But it does a lot of cool things. The only problem is it loses to Droll and a Shifter. So, but it's definitely a rogue deck. I think it's stronger than the Cybers pile. It's stronger than Dark Worlds. It loses to the same things. Tier Elements. I am going to be putting this in rogue. Now, I know there's a lot of tier truthers out there. I know there's a lot of people out there saying, like, Tier Elements is still as strong, it still competes, it still does all these things, like the Shu Ping list is crazy. No, is the nice way to say it. I don't think Tier Elements will ever be as strong as it was. They have managed to do a lot with what they have, but the way that I look at Tier Elements is the way I look at all these other decks. If half the people who spent time brewing Tier Elements brewed with any of these other decks, they would probably come up with something that's hand and fist stronger. And then finally, we have Vanquish Soul. I still think Vanquish Soul is a very strong deck. It does a lot that... it has a very strong resource loop. It's essentially Sky Striker 2.0. That's the way you have to look at Vanquish Soul, and a lot of people agree on that. In terms of where I'd put it, it feels weird to put it, like, here, like somewhere around tier 1.5. Because then you have just a lot of tier 1.5 decks. I think I'm going to move Labyrinth down to tier 2, and I'm going to stick it right there above Vanadium. So I think that's about my opinion. Now, this is my personal opinion on the format. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination this is 100% accurate. So let me ask you what you guys think. What do you think? Where would you put decks? What decks am I missing? What do you think is better, worse? Whatever. Let me know down in the comment section down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.